Half an hour outside Cooktown, in far north Queensland, a strange and imposing mountain rises out of the green savanna that looks like nothing else anywhere in the surrounding landscape, where everything around it is scrub, grass, and eucalyptus. This mountain is a towering, jet-black pile of boulders, some the size of houses, stacked against each other with no soil and almost no vegetation anywhere on its surface. For more than 150 years now, people have disappeared near it without explanation. Cattle have vanished into it. Police search parties sent to find missing travelers have come back with nothing. And in at least one case, the search party itself was never seen again. Scientists, historians, and the traditional owners who have always known this place are still working out exactly what is happening here. And the most recent investigation found something nobody expected. If you are new here, this channel covers ancient Australian history that most people were never properly taught. Subscribe now, and let me know in the comments below if you had ever heard of Black Mountain before watching this video today. Geologists describe Black Mountain as a granite formation that solidified from magma deep underground millions of years ago, before slowly being exposed at the surface as the softer surrounding rock eroded away around it over an enormous time's time. What remains today is not a mountain in the conventional sense, with a slope you can walk up. It is an enormous, chaotic jumble of granite boulders piled against one another at every conceivable angle, riddled with narrow crevices, hidden voids, and sudden vertical drop-offs that are impossible to see from above. There is almost no soil anywhere on its surface, and very little vegetation manages to take hold in the gaps between the rocks. The boulders themselves are not actually black. Most granite of this type is naturally gray. The color comes from a thin biological crust, a combination of lichen and algae that has grown across the surface of the rock over an extended period, darkening it to the deep, almost charcoal black that gives the mountain its name and its unmistakable appearance from a distance. Up close, the rock underneath that dark crust is the same pale granite found in countless other formations. What makes the site genuinely hazardous is not the rock's color. It is the structure underneath it. The boulders are not fused together as a single mass. They are simply stacked, balanced against each other by gravity, creating a labyrinth of narrow gaps, deep fissures, and hidden chambers extending well below the visible surface. A person or an animal that slips into one of these gaps can fall much further than expected, into a void that cannot be seen, reached, or heard from above. Search and rescue teams, equipped with ropes and specialist caving equipment, have, on multiple occasions, been physically unable to safely access certain voids at all. Removing surrounding boulders to reach someone trapped risks destabilizing the entire formation and burying the rescuers along with whoever they are trying to recover. This is the reason the entire mountain is officially closed to climbers, even though it sits within a national park that otherwise welcomes visitors. There is no marked trail leading up into the boulder field, no safety barrier installed partway up, and no rescue infrastructure built into the rock itself, because the terrain genuinely cannot support any of those things safely. Park authorities ask visitors to view the mountain only from designated lookout points on the surrounding road, a restriction that exists purely for practical safety reasons rather than as an arbitrary rule. The same crevices and voids that make the mountain so visually striking from a distance are precisely what make it lethal up close. And that contradiction, a landmark you are actively prevented from approaching the closer you get to it, is part of what has fed its reputation for more than a century. The mountain's traditional name is Kalikajakra, generally translated as Place of the Spear, given to it by the Kuku Yalanji people, whose country this is. The name itself carries a warning embedded directly into it, one that long predates any European account of the mountain's dangers. According to dreaming stories held by traditional owners, Kalkajaka was the site of a significant ancestral battle. Harold Ludwig, a descendant of the Western Yalonji and Gugu Yimithia clans with traditional ownership of the area, has described it as a sacred battlefield, the site of the last spear fight between the Black Cockatoo and White Cockatoo clans, a conflict between inland and coastal groups fought over contested hunting grounds. According to the story, many people died in that fight, and their remains were said to have been placed within the mountain itself. A separate version of the dreaming, also recorded from traditional owners, describes two giants who, both in love with the same woman, piling up the granite boulders that now form the mountain as weapons in their fight against each other. A battle that ended when they killed one another and left their stone piles behind as a permanent record of the conflict. Beyond the specific battle story, Kalikajarka has long been treated by the Kuku Yalanji as a place of genuine spiritual danger, distinct even from other significant sites in the surrounding area, such as Kambi, Julbano, and Burmba, all of which hold religious importance but are approached and treated quite differently by traditional owners depending on their specific cultural function. Traditional owners do not enter Kalkajaka itself, and visitors today are asked to respect that same boundary, observing the mountain from a distance rather than attempting to climb or explore it directly. This is not simply a modern safety rule attached after the fact. It reflects a far older understanding, held long before any European account of missing travelers, that this specific place required a different kind of respect than the country surrounding it. European accounts of disappearances at Black Mountain begin appearing in historical records not long after colonial settlement reached the region. In 1872, according to local accounts, a courier named Philip Granger went missing while searching for a stray calf near the mountain. Despite a search, neither Granger nor any trace of the animal was never found. 10 years later, in 1882, police searched for two missing cattlemen, Harry Owens and George Hawkins, who had also gone missing in the vicinity of the mountain. One of the two men eventually reappeared, but according to the accounts, was unable to give any coherent explanation of what had happened to him in the time he was missing. Later accounts describe a bushranger known as Sugarfoot Jack, who is said to have taken refuge near the mountain with several companions following a shoot-ant, reasoning that few pursuers would be willing to follow him into terrain that dangerous. A police search that followed reportedly found no trace of any of the men, no bodies, no horses, and no possessions, despite the area being thoroughly searched in the days that followed. In 1928, a prospector named Q Packer is recorded as having gone missing while searching the area for gold or gemstones. His body was later recovered, found with a gunshot wound and his rifle nearby, though the full circumstances were never conclusively established, leaving open the question of whether his death was accidental, self-inflicted, or something else entirely. A further disappearance in 1932 describes a traveler found dead near the mountain under circumstances that were not fully explained at the time, adding yet another entry to a growing local list of incidents that newspapers of the era were only too happy to report on in suitably dramatic terms. By this point, you can probably see why this single mountain earned a nickname usually reserved for a stretch of ocean between Florida and Bermuda. Local stories began referring to Cockajaka as Australia's own Bermuda Triangle, a place where the normal rules governing what should and shouldn't happen seemed not to apply, and where official explanations always seemed to arrive a little too late, or not at all. The pattern continued into living memory. Stories collected from the area described reports as recent as 2001, when two campers near the base of the mountain reported seeing what they described as a large dark mass moving toward their camp in the middle of the night, before it apparently vanished in front of them. Whatever actually happened that night, the men reportedly packed up and left immediately rather than waiting until morning. If you've made it this far, you are probably waiting for the supernatural explanation. Subscribe now if you want more of this series, because what researchers actually found when they looked closely at these stories is more interesting than anything paranormal. The Bermuda Triangle reputation, alongside the disappearances themselves, a separate body of folklore grew up around Black Mountain, describing unexplained phenomena experienced by people who never set foot on the rocks at all. Pilots flying over the area have, for decades, reported unusual instrument behavior and a general reluctance among local aviators to fly directly over the mountain at all. In the 1990s, a formal magnetic survey was conducted specifically to determine whether the granite itself carried unusual magnetic properties capable of interfering with aircraft instruments. The survey found no significant magnetic anomaly at the site. Other reports describe strange low moaning sounds said to emanate from within the rock pile, a phenomenon some researchers attribute to wind moving through the countless narrow gaps and chambers between the boulders, or to the boulders themselves shifting slightly under their own weight. A sound that could plausibly be mistaken at a distance and in the dark for something considerably stranger. Visitors have also long reported a generalized, hard-to-articulate sense of unease simply from looking at the mountain, a reaction some attribute to the stark visual contrast between the dark, lifeless rock and the green landscape surrounding it on every side, and others connect more directly to the weight of the stories already known about the place before arriving. What the historian actually found. In 2022, a Cooktown-based historian named Bev Shea conducted a detailed investigation into the disappearance stories that had been repeated about Black Mountain for well over a century. Her findings, reported through the ABC, did not confirm a supernatural explanation, but they also did not simply dismiss the mountain's reputation as pure invention. What she found was something more specific and in its own way, more unsettling than either extreme. Shea's research found that several of the most widely repeated disappearance stories, when traced back to original records rather than retellings of retellings, did not hold up as described. Some details had been altered, exaggerated, or conflated with other separate incidents over decades of informal storytelling. Names changed between versions, dates shifted by years or even decades, depending on who was telling the story and when. Incidents that had occurred at entirely different locations were sometimes folded into the Black Mountain narrative simply because the mountain already had a reputation that made it the obvious place to attach a vague or half-remembered tragedy to. As Shea put it directly, when you actually look closely at the claims, a significant number of them simply are not accurate in the form they are usually told. That finding does not mean nothing ever happened at Black Mountain. It means the cultural mythology surrounding the site had, over generations, absorbed and amplified a smaller number of real, tragic, and entirely explicable incidents into something that sounded far more mysterious and far more frequent than the verified historical record actually supports. Genuine disappearances did occur. The exact number, names, and circumstances had simply been blurred by more than a century of campfire retellings, newspaper embellishment, and the natural human tendency to remember the eerie version of a story rather than the mundane one. Shea's work did not erase the mountain's history. It simply separated what could actually be verified from what had quietly grown around it. The real explanation. Researchers who have studied the site's actual hazards point to a more grounded explanation for why disappearances, when they genuinely occurred, were often never resolved. The terrain itself makes conventional search efforts extraordinarily difficult. A person who falls into one of the mountain's deep, narrow fissures can be rendered completely invisible to searchers above, with no clear sightline, no scent trail accessible to tracking dogs, and frequently no safe way for rescue teams to physically reach the location, even once it has been identified. Additional, more mundane factors compound the difficulty. The area is remote, meaning disappearances were often not reported for days, allowing whatever trail existed to go cold before any search began. Waterways near the mountain, including nearby swimming holes, carry their own separate risks, including crocodiles and the kind of drowning incidents common to remote Australian waterways generally. Alcohol, unfamiliarity with the terrain, and simple poor decision-making in extreme heat have all been identified as contributing factors in specific, documented cases, the same mundane causes responsible for disappearances in dangerous remote terrain anywhere else in the world. None of this requires inventing anything supernatural. Jagged granite, hidden voids, genuine remoteness, and the difficulty of search and rescue in that specific kind of terrain are entirely sufficient to explain why people who went missing at Kalkajaka so often were never found, and why the mystery surrounding the mountain felt, for everyone telling the story afterward, like something stranger than genuinely significant about simple bad luck. What remains with magnetic fields or shadowy Kalkajaka has nothing to do sitting on top of the geology itself. Apparitions. It is the layered history field, a name, a real ancestral battlefield, embedded warning for far longer than that has carried and has existed in the region. And European settlement, exactly why this specific place demanded a different kind of respect than the country surrounding it. Black Mountain is not a haunted mountain, and a community of traditional owners who have always understood with total clarity it is a genuinely hazardous geological formation, sitting at the center of a story that grew larger and the scientific record does not support a supernatural explanation for what happened there. Aboriginal warning that turned out, on every level that matters, to have been right from the very beginning. Stranger with every decade it was retold, built on top of a small number of real tragedies, and a much older, dangerous on its own terms. In exactly the way the mountain does not need ghosts or magnetic anomalies to be dangerous. It was always If this surprised you, leave it in the comments. And its original name predicted, long before anyone wrote a single word about it. Subscribe for more ancient Australian history hiding in plain sight.